Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited today to bring to the podcast Karis Nafte. She's coming to us from South Africa. And as we were preparing, she indicated, which I think is true, that she is a unicorn because she is the only person I've ever heard of, probably in the world, who actually focuses on pet custody and how do we meet everybody's needs, including the pets, in divorce. She comes to us as a mediator, an author, and I'm so glad to have you. So welcome, Karis.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's just a perfect topic when you think about putting children first, because what are we going to do with the dog? You see the little dog, and if people are watching on video behind you, and I know I have many dogs of my own. I end up talking to clients and kids too when I do child advocacy about this heartbreaking situation of this family member. And at least in Colorado, where I'm located, the courts are like, yeah, that's a thing, kind of just like the table or the television. And I know you work around the world. So give us a little introductory of just sort of what do people need to know as we start talking about this kind of emotional, very emotional topic. It's like your dogs and your cats and your hamsters, they're like your kids.
Yep. So I think that's a great way to great segue into the first thing that people need to be aware of is that they're not their kids.
Yes.
So as much as we love them deeply and hugely, when you are discussing what's going to happen with the animals in the divorce, it is better if you don't frame them like they're children, because the needs of children are not the same as the needs of dogs. When we blur those lines, that's when you start ending up with very stressed out animals because they're being asked to sort of carry something that children should carry for us. But on a practical level, what is appropriate for a dog is not appropriate for your child. And we really, really need to have that distinction really clear, because loving your animal means giving them the very best for them as an animal, not as a child. So when we're looking specifically at the question, which I think is often the biggest question, which is, are we going to share the dog or not? The dogs that struggle being in shared situations, and now I'm making general statements here. So of course there's exceptions. Obviously there's always exceptions, but it's fair to make this as a general statement in terms of breed types. The breed types of dogs that are going to struggle moving between houses are the breeds of dogs that have been bred to be very territorial. So we're talking about guard dogs like your Shepherd, Dobermans, Rottweilers, Malinois, or dogs that have been bred, that were originally bred to work on farms and herd sheep or herd cows. I mean, behind me, I've got a cute drawing of my Australian cattle dog who's laying by my feet, but I had this portrait done of him. So dogs like my cattle dog, Sam, who were bred to move livestock, border collies, Australian shepherds, corgis, these dogs are genetically programmed to have a favorite person. And when I say favorite, I mean the person that in their little doggy mind is the instructions they should be taking. So the herding breed dogs, their whole identity is around following instructions from a person. Should I move the sheep? What should I do with them? So even if you don't have sheep, even if your dog's never been on a farm, the genetics still are telling them to listen to those instructions. And that's why if you've ever had a herding dog, you know how if you are thinking about picking up the tennis ball, they try to help you because that's like become their sheep. So again, very broadly speaking, and exceptions are of course there. Those breeds of dogs are going to struggle more in a shared situation because it will mean being separated routinely from their person that's their anchor. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Yeah. Okay.
Equally so, dogs that are bred to be very territorial will also struggle. So these can be dogs like Great Pyrenees dogs, Anatolian Shepherds, dogs that are very, very much guard dogs, like I'm going to protect my property. If they keep moving between properties, they don't know if they're coming or going. So those dogs are going to struggle more in a shared situation.
Why do you think, what we discussed very right out of the chute was people make the mistake of kind of treating them like they're children or putting them in the same category. Why in your work, why do you think that occurs, and what's the problem with that?
In the circumstance of divorce specifically, I think something happens to the human psyche or the sort of family structure where if there's no human children, if there's just dog children, um, we can't help but sort of see them as a child because the family unit is separating. Um, a lot of the work that I do, not as much now, but that I have for the last 30 years, has been working with dogs moving in and out of shelters, or where people have to find a new home for their dog with nothing to do with divorce. Let's say they couldn't afford their dog anymore, or the person got sick and couldn't keep their dog. And there's many, many reasons why people have their dog has to go
Mm.
to a new home. In those situations, I don't hear people saying words as much like, the dog is my child. The dog can't live without me. I raised the dog. He won't be able to cope without me. But those are phrases I do hear in the divorce world because I think something unconscious happens where we're saying the dog is my child because I got it in the bubble of the relationship.
Does that
What I can
happen when
tell
people have children and they don't have children? Both?
less so less so, I think if there's
Yeah,
children, literal
yeah,
children in the
yeah.
family, there tends to be what I would describe as a more kind of level-headed approach to the animal, not always,
Mhm.
but people are usually more focused on what's the best thing for the children, and very often the parents think that the dog should move with the child, so that's sort of like a given in some people's mind. Um, but it's less about, kind of fighting tooth and nail to keep the dog with one
Mhm.
person. My first piece of advice is to whatever you do, that you do it for a test period, like a trial period. So we're going to say, okay, let's try this for 6 months and let's see how the dog handles it, or 3 months or 4 months, whatever the parents want to do. But the parents need to know from the beginning that it may not work for the dog to move between houses. And so if it doesn't, then what is plan B going to look like? They might not be able to decide that right then. They might, the whole family, the dust needs to settle after the
Yeah.
divorce and the routine. And also during that period, I agree. You don't want to make any more big changes for the children.
Mhm.
But parents need to understand that if it's the dog is stressed by moving, what will happen is the dog will withdraw from the children. The dog, I mean, I see cases very often where dogs start nipping at kids because
Mm.
the kids are like hugging the dog, trying to get it in the car to go to mom's house or dad's house. And the dog is sort of almost being forced into a role of being a therapy dog that they can't. Not all dogs are able to be therapy dogs. It's not in every dog's character to do that. So a smart approach is to do it for a trial period so that everybody's on board. We're going to see how Rover is handling this. For some families, I think there's a natural adjustment to realize actually dogs better at this house, and it just sort of happens naturally. For other families, it's not so much, and one parent might think it's working and the other parent might not think it's working. And then you have to have a harder conversation about, is this really going to be sustainable? Here's an example from my practice. A parents split up, mom and a dad. They had two small kids under the age of 6, and I think also two Cavaliers, if my memory's correct, or two small breeds. Um, and also, okay, the dog's going to move with the children. It was sort of a given. And then the penny dropped for mom, who was moving into a penthouse apartment, that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to put the dogs in an elevator and go down 6 floors every time they need a pee. And that means I have to wrap up two small children who can't be left alone in the house and take them with me. And it's just not this, it's not possible. She sort of, with everything changing, she hadn't really realized that this was, whereas dad was staying in the house with the yard and everything. So the dog stayed with dad and mom got a cat with a litter box. And then it was sort of so that there was an animal in both houses, and that worked for everybody. That was a compromise. So you have to look at the housing situation, and then you have to look at the dog itself. Like, how much exercise does this dog actually need? Is it a lazy dog? Is it a dog that needs, a couple of hours of good exercise a day in order to be happy? And it's like, when dogs don't get enough exercise, that's when you get dogs that bark all the time. That's when you get dogs who drag you down the road on the leash because they're so frustrated. They're desperate for more walks. That's when you get dogs who chew up your shoes. All of those things, all of the behaviors that we find frustrating and infuriating about dogs is almost always a dog just burning off steam. Like they got it, their energy's got to go somewhere. And
Mm.
those are the options. They can bark, they can chew, they can dig, they can run.